6 years or so, and I've been preaching ever since I've been baptized. I preached for a congregation out in Clyde, Ohio, Butternut Ridge, and I've preached in LaGrange, I've preached in Columbus, and now I get the privilege of getting the chance to preach here. And so last week we kind of built up on, my lesson was trusting in the Lord. Now, I defined what trust was and why we should trust in the Lord, but I really didn't touch base that much on how we trust the Lord. So I want to look into, this is probably the atheist's strongest argument they can muster to say that there is no God. And that is the question of if there is a loving God, why would He allow suffering to exist and be in the world? And we're going to address that this morning. And the first thing we need to realize is that suffering came in the world because of sin. That is the whole entire reason that we are where we are today. Because when Eve was deceived by the serpent, she committed sin by transgressing what God had told her not to do, which was not eat from the tree of fruit knowledge. And by that, we know what is right and what is wrong. Now, when they knew what right and wrong was, they saw that they were naked, right? And so they sewn together fig leaves to make coverings. But we see that God thought that wasn't good enough, so He made tunics for them. Now, tunics back then were made out of animal skin. So if you think about the animal in which God chose to be their tunics, whatever did it do to deserve to be killed just to make better coverings for them than what Adam and Eve made them themselves. This is the consequence of which the presence of sin brings suffering into the world. And the thing we must realize is that suffering happens on both the good and the bad. God is not a respecter of persons. We see this in Matthew chapter 5, and it's verse 45 if you want to be specific, but it says God makes the sun to rise on the good and the evil, and sends rain on the just and the unjust. So you see all these people, it seems like all they're doing is just for themselves, and they have all these riches, and you think, how can they have that, but here I'm following God, and yet I'm not as well off as them? Well, the thing is, they have their reward here. Unless they change their eternal situation by having more concern for their soul, they get their reward here. So, but not only does He send sunshine on evil, He also sends it on us. Us as Americans, we greatly overlook the blessings in which America provides for us. Just an example, there was a new couple that just came to our church not a while ago, and she came over from Dubai. And we were talking about customs over there and about different things and costs. And the first thing she exclaimed when we went out to eat is how cheap everything was. Paying for 12 bucks a person at a buffet, that was like hitting the lottery for her. And it's like, how much? Why? How much is over in Dubai? And she's like, you have to pay about 100 bucks a person to go to a Chinese buffet over in Dubai. So here in America, we greatly overlook the blessings in which God has given us and the easy living in which we can pursue in this life. So we need to have a more broader view that we are better off than most people in the world, but also God sends the rain on the just and the unjust. And that is what we have to get to our minds. Just because you're a good person doesn't eliminate you from worldly suffering. Now, an example in the Bible in which we could turn to of suffering is the whole story of Job. In Job 1:1, it says that he was a blameless and upright man and shunned evil. So this was God's, pretty much God's right-hand man before Abraham. Job was said to be the first, not the first written, but in the sequence of events, the life of Job happened before Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So this is right after creation, the creation chapters. You would go to Job if you were to read the Bible chronologically. So here, Job is God's man right now at the time. And the devil comes along and challenges him, and it says that if you take everything away from him, his health and his possessions, he will curse you in front of your face. And we see that one man, right after another, just keeps on bringing him bad news. If you think you are having a bad day, just read a chapter in Job and you see how bad a bad day can really get. He has thieves steal all his livestock. He's had, I think it said, fire from heaven came down and killed his servants. Now, fire from heaven, when it's referred into the Bible, is another word, another element in which we know as hail. They called hail fire from heaven. And then later it says a great wind, in which we know great winds here in America as twisters or tornadoes. A great wind came and collapsed his family's house, and all of his sons and daughters that were in the house were killed because the house collapsed. So if you think about anybody who did not deserve this, Job would be the man, because he was the best God had at the time. And so here we see all these things happen to him, but yet in the very end we know the outcome, that he ended up remaining faithful. If you think about today in America, if that happened to somebody nowadays, how hard it would be to keep your faith in God. Most Americans today would probably curse God and take the option of curse God and die and take the easy way out than having to live with their losses. Another example, more in the New Testament, is Paul. And I'd like to read a place in Corinthians. It's 2 Corinthians chapter 11. 2 Corinthians chapter 11. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, and I'll be reading in verse 22, starting in verse 22. And there it reads, "Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they the seed of Abraham? So am I. Are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool. I am more, in labor more abundant, in stripes above measure, in prison more frequently, in deaths often. From Jews 5 times I received 40 stripes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. Night and day I have been in the deep. In journeys often, in perils of waters, in perils of robberies, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils of Gentiles, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness and toil, in sleeplessness often, in hunger and thirst, in fasting often, in cold and nakedness. Besides the other things, what comes upon me daily, my deep concern for all the churches."